All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Arts Workshop. We have been doing this since 2017. We try to have an event a month, usually a guest speaker, but sometimes it's something else. But tonight we are honored to have Mr. Hunter Gorinson from Oni Press. I always pronounce it Oni. Is that the right way to pronounce it?
Yeah, Oni. Yep,
Oni,
Japanese,
yeah, yeah.
my friend. Yep.
A little background. Hunter was part of the very first panel I ever organized at Eternal Con around 2014, 2015. Heidi was there and Heather, and I think you, and I think it was Peter Hambozi and Mari Paz Cabardo. So,
Cool.
anyways, finally, and back then you were working for, was it Valiant?
Valiant. Yep.
It was Valiant, right? So back then Hunter was doing marketing for Valiant, and now he is with Oni Press as the president and publisher. That's correct.
Indeed.
Anyways, I think I'm answering your question, the first question for you. So please tell us about yourself and what first got you into comics. Oh, but wait, before we start, everybody
Sure.
please give a round of applause for Hunter for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I
I would
appreciate
ask that everybody mute themselves until we have questions later on.
it's all good. I'm a comics lifer. Uh I Some of my earliest memories are of reading comics. I always had comics around, even from the time probably by the time I was 4, 5, 6 years old. I was deeply into comics. I had a slightly old dad. So my dad was about 10 years older than the other dads, you know what I'm saying? And he had grown up in Brooklyn in the 40s and 50s, reading, I guess in the 50s. Grown up in Brooklyn in the 50s, reading Golden Age comics and had fond memories of EC Comics and the Justice Society and Silver and I guess Golden Age Superman and Batman and that kind of stuff. He's one of those guys who said like, "Oh yeah, I definitely had a Detective 27, but my mom threw it out," like that kind of thing. And so
Wow.
my half brother is also 10 years older than me. So I was born in 1985. So by the time I was 5 or 6 years old, I had my dad reintroducing me to that original Golden Age material. My brother, who was 10 years older than me, so he's in high school and he was into like the cool stuff. So he was into Vertigo, into Sandman and Swamp Thing, all the Claremont X-Men, all like the cool older kid books in the early 90s. And then I was right there for the death of Superman and Zero Hour and the birth of Image Comics, etc. So I got a full 70 years of comic book education probably by the time I was 6, 7, 8 years old.
Does that mean that from your dad's Golden Age collection, it was mostly DC stuff?
He didn't have any of the original books. He didn't collect them. He had just read them.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So were you in the beginning, were you a DC guy or a Marvel guy?
I originally was very much a DC guy, and I still have a very strong affinity for like the post-crisis DC
Uh-huh.
universe. Like those the earliest books I remember reading are probably like John Byrne Superman comics and John Romita Jr. and Nocenti Daredevil comics. Those were like my first comics that I really loved.
Got it. I was always a DC kid, and it's only recently that I realized why. Because Marvel Comics was done in the Marvel style, there was a lot more text on the page in the Marvel book back in the 70s and 80s.
I
So there's
would
a
have
lot to
too.
read.
Late 80s, for some reason I thought late 80s Marvel comics, with a few exceptions like that Daredevil run, there was some I really liked, but I thought they were pretty stodgy. I thought DC comics were the cooler, leaner, more fun comics at the time.
Right. I remember, yeah, that Daredevil run with Frank Miller was pretty good.
Yep.
It's funny because um before it was must have been the mid 80s that my comic book shop just happened to be trying to unload all their Daredevils. So everything was 50 cents. So
Very nice.
I got up to issue 18, and I just have a few gaps, but and that
Pretty
was before the movies, before anything, so before he even got popular.
nice.
So let me ask you, what's the goal when so you obviously like comics enough that you wanted to be in the industry. Was it the goal always to be a publisher? And if so, what were the career steps?
Uh, not not really. My original plan, I fell out of comics like by the time I was like 13. like the very common story. I got really into music and other stuff, and I kind of drifted away from comics in the late 90s. And I came back for the Sin City movie. I saw the Robert Rodriguez, Frank Miller Sin City movie. And I obviously loved Frank Miller as a kid. I'd never read Sin City, so I saw the movie, loved it. Was like, I got to go read all these books. That got me back into reading comics while I was in college. But I was a journalism major, and I originally thought I was going to be a journalist. And unfortunately, I was a journalist, and I graduated into the worst economic climate for journalism probably in the past century, which was during the financial crisis of like 2008.
Uh,
So I did that for a few years. I was originally from Washington, D.C. I was covering like the mayor's office and city council and stuff. And my aspiration was to be a reporter for the Washington Post. And I knew people who worked there, and they were like, "You do not want to work here. We're all about to be out of jobs writing food blogs in about 6 months." This is before Jeff Bezos bought it. And so I took any job I could, and I was a freelance reporter, and I covered the DC City Council and mayor's office and stuff. And I wound up breaking for a small local paper a minor scandal involving the mayor that wound up trickling up to the Washington Post and wound up trickling up as a big kind of like local news to do about how the mayor at the time had been funneling. This is why you guys came to the comics call, so to hear about the intricacies of Washington D.C. politics. But anyway, the mayor had been funneling contracts to one of his frat brothers from college that had not been permitted to do work, etc. And that became a little minor scandal. And my editor at the time was like, "Hey, great work. You should go buy a gun though, because like these guys may try to come like fucking. I'm sorry, I shouldn't swear. They try to come kill you while you're asleep." And I was like, "Great! I made like no money doing this. I think this is not what I signed up for. You know what I mean?"
so
So
you
I went
went to another no money making industry.
Yeah, so I went back to grad. I was like, I put a lot of work into this, and this is my end reward is that I may get beaten to death in an alley. So I was like, you know what? I should do something I'm a little bit more passionate about. And I had gotten very heavily back into comics at that time. So I went back to graduate school. I moved back to New York where I'd gone to college. And while I was there, I said, I know too much about this stuff to not take a swing and go be an intern. I should go get an internship at Marvel Comics because I have to get one for credit anyway or whatever. Fought with my school about whether or not my internship would count. Got an interview at Marvel, and they said, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be a comic book editor." And they said, "Do you know what? You can write a press release, right? You have a journalism degree." And I said, "Absolutely." They said, "Do you know what a previews catalog is?" And I said, "Absolutely." And they said, "You're in marketing." And I went, "No." Turned out to be like one of the best things that ever happened. Was there was like 600 people all trying to be editors and nobody in marketing. So I got to learn the entire business side of how Marvel operated. I was there during the like Marvel had very shortly before that been bought by Disney, but the integration hadn't started yet. So I was there for the entire like Marvel is now becoming a part of Disney. Started in the old Marvel offices, which were disgusting and terrible, and moved to the new shiny Marvel offices, sanctioned by Disney, etc. I know you guys are all comic book fans, so you'll enjoy this. Part of that move, they cleaned out the Marvel archive and said we can't take this stuff in the move, so we're gonna throw it away unless anybody wants it. So like every day for like 3 weeks, I rode home on the subway with a long box full of stuff from the Marvel archives. Here, hold on. If you'll spare me, I'll see if I can find one because you guys will enjoy this. Hold on 1 second.
Oh my God. That's like a dream come true. Long boxes from Marvel.
Aha! So I have like
Your
tons.
camera's off. Your camera's off.
I know. Sorry, I turned it off so you couldn't see me before. I have like tons of these. So like a Marvel Masterworks, and it has like a sticker on the back that says like "Property of Marvel, do not steal." Like plenty of these. So got lots of great stuff, and a lot of people. I've not only learned how like the business side of comics operated uh, while I was there, and got to work on this was post Civil War. A lot of cool stuff was going on. But also met a lot of people who were my colleagues as interns at Marvel. All I still know because they almost all of them work professionally in comics in some capacity. One of them was Donnie Cates, one of one of my best friends. First person I met, first two people I met as interns who sat next to me for that entire time. One was Donnie Cates, and one was another writer named Elliot Rahal, who's still working today. Done work with him at Valiant and at Pony.
Got it, got it. So, and then from there,
From there, at the end of that period, I got introduced to the guys at Valiant, which this is probably like 2010. So the former CEO of Marvel he had left after the acquisition, and he had started financing a reboot, relaunch of the original Valiant universe from the 90s. There have been very few details released, but I was referred over to them through the marketing department at Marvel. And one thing led to another, and then I was the least experienced person on a team of like 5 people, probably. I was working alongside the former publisher of Wizard, the former CEO of Marvel, the former executive editor at Marvel, who'd done like some of my favorite books, like Straczynski's Thor, Straczynski and Coipel's Thor, Immortal Iron Fist by Fraction and Aja, etc. And then we spent from there, one thing led to another, and spent almost 10 years working at Valiant and slowly rebuilding that into a going concern.
and then did you go to Oni after that, or were there some other steps in
A
between?
couple steps in between there. I got a couple steps in between there for you, Ramon. So Valiant was acquired by a Chinese media company in 2018. And so after that, I left and I said I had a lot of options at that point. Valiant was viewed as pretty successful, fortunately, and I thought we'd done a lot of good work there. And so I actually did 2 things simultaneously during that time. I had never wanted to work in film and television. I'm a big fan, obviously, but if I had wanted to do that, that's what I would have gone to do. However, given the ways that comics and media had been kind of like not just cross-pollinating, maybe, but slamming together over the course of that time, I said, I've learned how the business of comics works to a large extent. I need to learn this specific aspect of it. So there was a couple guys who we've been working with on a couple of media projects at Valiant during that time, and they reached out to me and said, "Hey, we need someone with your comic book knowledge to help us with film and TV stuff. Would you be interested in that?" So that company became Hive Mind,
I
uh, production company that made The Witcher, made the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie with Guillermo del Toro, and made we did the Bloodshot movie, which was kind of a spinoff of our time at Valiant, and we did The Expanse. We did the last 2 seasons of The Expanse on Amazon, as well as a bunch of cool comp. Like we worked on a Gideon Falls TV show with Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino for a while. Bunch of other cool stuff. But they said, hey, like for the first time in a million years, my knowledge of comics, of weird comics from the 80s and obscure science fiction books was at high value in Hollywood. So I did that for a few years, learned how all that worked, worked with some great people, got to work with Sean Daniel, who is one of the co-founders of Hive Mind, who's one of the best, most storied movie producers of the past 40 years, produced Animal House, produced Blues Brothers, produced the Mummy franchise, Tombstone, like some of my favorite movies of all time. And then while we were doing that, me and some of my former colleagues from Valiant also co-founded a company called Bad Idea together, which is still chugging along. But I did those 2 things up through the pandemic, and then in 2020 or 2021, the fine folks at Boom Studios reached out to me, and they had been having a lot of success with Something Is James Tinian, Something Is Killing the Children, and the Keanu Reeves book Berserker, and just needed some extra sets of hands internally to manage a bunch of projects. And so I became the first head of business development for Boom. And I was at Boom a relatively short amount of time. I was at Boom for less than 2 years when I got the call about the opportunity to come to me. So what all of this means is there's about 15 people who work on the business side of comics. So if you can withstand it long enough, your chance on the wheel is bound to come up.
Well, congratulations. That's a very, very interesting path to where you are now.
Yes, I'm very lucky. I'm doing exactly what I would like to be doing in life, which is a very fortunate place to be, no doubt.
So we've had other publishers on here, and every time I ask this question, I get a different answer. So let me ask you, what are the primary responsibilities of a US publisher?
I think my job as publisher is obviously to wear many hats, but I guess to put a finest point on it is like I have to uh, be up to speed on how every single facet of the company is operating, and then make sure that they're working in unison together. So what I mean by that is I've often said that like every time you go into a comic book store and pick up a new issue off the shelf, that is a tiny little miracle that has happened because like 87 things have to have gone right in order for that to work. So we had to get the contract done on time. The writer had to turn a script on time. Penciler had to not have any delays. Inker had to get to the pages. Colorist had to do it. Letterer, production, printing plant had to get it. The truck at the printing plant had to get it to Diamond or Lunar or what the case may be. And then it had to get to the store without being unscathed. There's like 127 steps uh, along the way, and we work on very, very, very tight timelines that make any other form of media's head want to explode. It's a hamster wheel, and it like never stops. So my job as publisher is to help make sure that that system is working properly and that we're not encountering any log jams. And then at the same time, like balancing business and creative to make sure that we're both introducing the right kind of books that we want to that are reflective of what we want to have represented in the marketplace, making sure that those books are being done on time, contract, uh, working with managers and agents and stuff like that to make sure that the talent is taken care of and set up and working. And then I guess that is business too. That's business and creative. But and then on the business side, the operations logistical side, that the book's getting solicited at the right time, that Diamond and Lunar, if it's a periodical, or Simon and Schuster have the information they need. So it's actually immensely complicated. It's immensely complicated, a little bit hard to explain, and it is not everyone's cup of tea because it is highly, highly, highly detail oriented, unfortunately.
Now you called it a system a while back. When you came in into own and maybe some of the other jobs, do you find that there's a system in place that already works, or do you have to usually recreate or do some tweaking?
We did a significant amount of rebuilding at Oni, which was like Oni's a 27-year-old company. What you'll find is that each one of these, each, I would consider Oni to be one at this point, one of maybe the 5 or 6 tenured. I would love to know what you guys think, of course. One of the established 5 or 6 longest running independent comic book companies. They're all a little bit different. I've been lucky enough to work at a couple of them now, and I have very close friends who work at others. Each one of them has their own kind of ethos, production timeline, etc. Oni was always traditionally a West Coast, Portland-based company. I do not live in Portland. I live on the East Coast. I'm from DC, went to school and lived in New York for many years, which is where Valiant was based. So I've tried to bring a little bit of East Coast organizational rigor to Oni, which has been reinforced by my collaborator and partner in crime, our editor in chief, Sierra Han. So there's a lot of strengths inside of Oni and a lot of very talented people who work there, but we're trying to like maximize our market potential, which means that those dates, paying attention to dates, paying attention to processes is very important.
Would you say that you came in to sort of like I guess set things straight or make change at the company?
Yeah, Oni was in like kind of a definitely in a transitional period. I don't know how many of you remember this, but about 2 years ago, there was a lot of change at Oni. A lot of the longstanding people who had been there for years and years and years left. And so it was kind of like a big question. A lot of creators were up in arms about that. So, I stepped into a a
Situation.
situation. I won't qualify that situation, but a situation. And I was just really upfront about what I wanted to do and how we were going to do it. And it's actually all gone according to plan. We're about like 105% of plan right now, so it can be
Well,
done.
you guys just got an Eisner nomination. Congratulations.
At 3, thank you.
Three. Yeah, that's right. Okay, let me ask you now. And this question has kind of two meanings. Like, let me ask you, what's different about Oni today from before you took over, and what makes Oni different from other publishers out there?
Yeah, so Oni's 27-year-old company was founded in 1997. I have very, very fond memories of buying the Oni books off the rack at that time, like Oni Double Feature. Kevin Smith wrote a Clerks comic in 1997 or 1998 that was a big to do, went through like 5 printings or something. I loved that thing, and it was drawn by Jim LaFood. I read it to absolute pieces. And I think that was, if we've done anything at Oni, what we've done is kind of navigate it back towards that original iteration, or we've kind of like tried to, I guess what we're really trying to do is kind of thread together what I consider to be the three great eras of the company, because something's around like this in pop culture for that length of time, it's going to go through kind of different eras. There was that original Clerks and Oni Double Feature era of Oni in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the company was like a reaction, essentially like a reaction to the excesses of late 90s image comics. You know what I mean? They did black and white books. They were a little bit counterculture, a little bit renegade. They weren't full underground comics, but they were like in conversation with that. They were like
Right, I remember. Yeah.
what Matador Records or Sub Pop was doing in music in the 90s. That's what Oni was aspiring to be. And then after that, Oni got into doing, and I think that counterculture period ran all the way up to like Scott Pilgrim, obviously, which was exactly 20 years ago, 2004, exemplifies that to a great degree, right? Um, then the company did a lot of really solid kind of like genre books in the mid 2000s, stuff like The Sixth Gun by Cullen Bunn and Brian Hurt, stuff like The Bunker by Joshua Fialkov and Joe Infiari. There's a book called Letter 44 that I loved by Charles Soule at the time. So doing these kind of like quirky left of center genre books. And then the company really pioneered in a couple spaces from the time from like maybe 2014 onward in two ways. One was being one of the first authentic, was being one of the first to really go all in on what we would now call young adult and middle grade content, which has obviously become a huge thing in the industry in the subsequent years with all of the big five publishers going in on it. Books like the Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill are a good reflection of that. And then doing like authentically diverse LGBTQ stories at a time when that was not a trendy or fashionable thing to do. And there's countless examples of that at Oni. So everything from Sophie Campbell's Wet Moon, which I think is an absolutely gorgeous series of graphic novels, to, of course, Maya Kobabi's Genderqueer, which is the most banned book in America and a perennial bestseller. And so what we've been trying to do at Oni is take those three things, right, and essentially figure out what the through line through them is. And I think what the through line is like, I have several controversial theses about comics, and one of them is that comics are not mainstream. Like, so one of the things that you've often heard is like, we need to get back to the days of the spinner rack. The problem with comics is that you can't buy them at Walmart or at 7-Eleven or whatever. And I actually don't believe that to be true. I think that
Much more complicated than that.
comics are a subculture, and like subcultures can still produce things that become mainstream, like The Walking Dead or like Scott Pilgrim. But there's nothing wrong with being a subculture, and it's an entirely healthy thing to do. And so over the course of the past 10 or 15 years, as comics have gotten more ingrained with other forms of popular media, some of what I would consider to be the rougher edges around comics that made it such a fun and engaging medium have come off. And that as a consequence, comics feel a little bit boring right now and feel a little bit corporatized. And can we re-embrace Oni's original mandate to be a little bit counterculture and a little bit renegade, to do fun stuff that doesn't have to worry about being a TV show on Netflix, and just let people draw cool books. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. So sort of asks that answered one of my other questions, but let me ask you this. Any ideas on how to make the overall industry better? I
I
mean,
mean,
people will say that, that maybe current business models aren't working. We don't have enough of an audience, or we don't have enough readership. That the periodical books are on their way out compared to the graphic novels. So do you have any ideas on how to I guess improve the industry?
here's what I'll say, which is like, nothing's perfect. You know what I mean? But if you take a look around, I'll say two things. One of which is, if you take a look around at other forms of media, be that video games or what's going on in the film and TV world right now, Comics is the only thing in specifically in publishing, but I think it radiates outward in other forms of media. Like the readership and sales levels of comics during the pandemic, obviously exploded, but have continued to outpace growth of other forms of media. If you take a look around, I'm sure you guys are at least casually familiar. Like the film and TV business is going through a radical realignment right now that is not fun. It's probably the worst time to work in that industry, maybe certainly in the 21st century. It is exceedingly ruthless out there right now. Comics, I never thought I'd hear myself say this, are a relatively stable industry compared to what's going on with the disruption in other forms of media, whether that's through consolidation or the introduction of AI or what have you. And at the
I
same time,
mean,
I'll also say this, Ramon, which is that the quality, here's what I've come to appreciate as the publisher of a comic book company, which is it's really complicated to understand how comics can work as a business. It took me years to do it. And I had to work with a lot of very smart people who have done this at a high level and been able to ask them questions on a one-to-one basis. The amount of people who I've met that actually understand how this stuff works at a fundamental level is very small. And so when I hear people on Twitter or whatever saying like, "Oh yeah, the whole business is fundamentally broken," I mean, like almost to a man, I can virtually guarantee you that those people have almost no idea what they're talking. And I don't mean that in like a pejorative way. I mean that simply as a statement of fact, because this stuff is like very complicated. And one thing to consider too is you know, at a certain level, at a certain level, it's very hard to become extravagantly wealthy in comics as an individual or as a company. It certainly can happen. You know what I mean? And trust me, some of your favorite creators, there's plenty of very well compensated out there. You know what I mean? And have been able to make more than an adequate living at doing this. They're few and far between, but it is possible. But it all boils down to like we're selling, you know, $3.99 or $4.99 comics. You sell those at 50% off or more to a distributor. You have to subtract out all the money it takes to manufacture them and do variant covers and yada yada, get it colored and yada 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 all down the line. At the end of that process, there's like cents, not dollars left over. Saying, and so the only way to counter that is to sell lots and lots and lots of them. It's like a volume principle. So these are the kind of questions we think through day in and day out when trying to figure out how stuff is going to work.
does this mean that when you mentioned earlier that the industry is very stable in comparison to those other mediums, that does that mean that you're talking mainly about the direct market?
No, I think that there's one of the best things that's happened to the comic book medium is the introduction of the book market as something that can buoy, in some cases not just supplemental but larger than the direct market. Oni is very fortunate in that it's one of the few major publishers that has like a very healthy book market business. But what I mean by like, here's what I would say, which is uh, I had a former coworker from Valiant who always used to have this one expression that I didn't quite understand at the time, and now I deeply appreciate, which she would always say, look at the donut, not the hole. And so when people criticize the comic book industry and they say, oh, the direct market's too small and we're never going to get out of this, I say, look at the donut and not the hole, which is you have 2,000 stores or more in North America entirely dedicated to selling your books. If you said that to any other industry, teacups, uh, chocolate, like they would be like, yeah, please give me the 2,000 stores. People come back every week because they want more. You know what I'm saying? That's an incredibly powerful thing that people have just kind of demonetized because it's just familiar. You know what I mean? But we shouldn't underestimate the power of what that is. So the direct market's, in my opinion, a wonderful thing that should be supported. It's not perfect, but it's
I
like a
think
powerful thing.
I think a lot of the people who do the complaining are not complaining so much about are sort of like complaining because they're not getting the comics of old, They're not getting the Marvel and DC books that they used to get when they were kids. So they complain that,
Yeah,
that
and I mean, like that's to be expected. I've also heard a separate strain of people say something to the effect of like, we got to move away from periodical comics. We got to go to it should be all graphic novels. We should just be all comic book stores should just sell graphic novels. Why do we even need comics anymore? And what I want to say to those people is, we've already introduced you to the rather thin economics of comic book publishing and the way that the direct market functions. So what they're suggesting is we replace the direct market with independent bookstores, which if you know anything about like publishing, it's not like running an independent bookstore is some sort of ATM compared to running a
Correct,
comic.
yeah.
It's just as problematic a business, if not more so, because it doesn't have like the built-in weekly cycle and collector base and stuff like that. So it's like for some of these things that people bring up, I just want to be like, have you thought through this your point to like the second stage? You know what I mean? I understand that books are perceived to be more tasteful and fancier than comics, but at a fundamental level, comics aren't fancy. You know what I mean? It's also kind of what I'm part of what I mean by it. Like comics aren't mainstream. They're not like a fancy thing that's ever going to be like chic. They can be cool, but they're probably never going to be chic luxury item. You know what I mean?
Okay, a few more questions, but I'd like to open it up to the audience for now. So does anybody have any questions for Hunter?
I do.
Please.
Go ahead.
Uh, am I the one talking?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a question. When it came to the introduction and popularization of manga, and do you think that has sort of like benefited the industry of comics or sort of negatively impacted because now you have like this competition of this new sort of book style, coming to the West? That would basically be my question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think no, manga has 100% benefited the industry as a whole. If you ask I'm almost 40 years old. If you ask someone my age, like how they got into comics, they would say like Jim Lee's X-Men #1 in 1992, or maybe the X-Men Limited series, the original one from the 90s or whatever. If you ask someone who's under 25 today how they got into comics, it's undoubtedly probably going to be manga was the first thing they read. It's not going to be Spider-Man or whatever. So those books were widely published, widely available, high quality. They taught people the language of comics. And so I don't functionally see a huge difference between the content of manga and Western comics. Certainly there's some stylistic differences, but there's stylistic differences between, you know, an art film that you see at the local art house theater and then Kong versus Godzilla in movie theaters. They're still both movies. You know what I mean? Uh, there are some giant economic differences between the business of manga and Western comics. And so there's like there's several reasons why manga are able to be produced in high volume at a lower price point than Western comics. Obviously, one of the other common knocks on comics is they're too expensive. Manga is like way cheaper. And there's like several good reasons why manga can be cheaper that I don't think people fully appreciate.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Another question? Yeah, I just read
You
the
brought
next.
up
Go ahead, Josh.
you brought up earlier that people are saying that we should ditch floppies for periodicals
Or for
and trade paperbacks at some point.
Yeah.
I wanted to get your opinion on using more periodicals as like a selling thing. This is another manga question because I'm young, but when I was a kid, Shonen Jump published in America, it didn't last forever,
Yep.
but it's still going on in Japan. And Shonen Jump, like they publish the new chapters for their long running series all in one magazine. So
Yep.
I'm wondering if like that type of idea could be added on top of the floppies is kind of like here are our new #1s all in a row. And if you like one or more, you can like find the others as they come out. Do you think that's like a viable strategy at all?
It's a good idea. There have been like some approximations of that in the past. The one thing about Shonen Jump is the culture of comics in Japan is like entirely different. So Shonen Jump's almost like if you could take every Marvel comic and smush it together into one, what is it, like 112 pages long or something, and then every single diehard Marvel fan had been reading that one comic from the time that they were 6 through the
Mm.
price, and they bought it at the station every week before they got on the subway or whatever. It's like it's the one thing. It's the king of Japanese manga, obviously, uh, and it's not part of um, they don't have things subdivided into series in the same way that we traditionally have here. You've seen like when I was just getting back into comics, Marvel would frequently repackage stuff into like this was during like when the Ultimate line was first starting originally. They'd do these things called Marvel must-haves, where they'd reprint like sold out number ones in kind of like a chunkier, oversized format, which I actually loved. That helped me get caught back up on a bunch of stuff. Um, I think here's the problem for Western comics to do that, and I guess it speaks exactly to what I was saying is the economic incentive of manga versus comics, which is um, not to reveal all suspected industry secrets, but like part of the reason why it's so uh, profitable to make manga is because they're licensing in a big corpus of pre-existing content from Japan, right? But they're not paying the underlying creators to generate that from scratch. So it's like a couple thousand,
They've been created already.
it's a couple $1,000s versus a couple $100,000 to do. Like when we do comics here, we pay people page rates. They get paid to do the script. They get paid to do the art. They get paid to do the coloring. With manga, you're just paying the publishing house a couple $1,000 for the rights to reprint it. So automatically, like it's already just what we would call a profit and loss potential on the book, P&L, is already so much lower. It's the difference between having to invest $2,000 versus $200,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're going to do it with new Western comics in a jumbo oversized format like that. It's going to cost 5 times as much. It's going to cost 5 times as much as a normal comic, right? So assuming that was standard comics $3.99, now automatically that book's got to be $20 if it's going to make the same amount of revenue. If it's not going to cost $20 and we're going to do it in the Shonen Jump pricing range of like, Shonen Jump probably costs like $5 to $10 in Japan. I don't know what it costs off the top of my head. You have to sell 4 times as many in order to make it work. And so it's like, it's not impossible, but it's difficult and it defies like all common market logic of what we're currently dealing with. So like, if you're going to do that, it better be really, 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 it better be really, really good. And you better be really, really good at marketing. You know what I mean? It's risky. That's all my long answer. Short answer, risky. But it's a good idea.
Any other questions, guys?
I think Paul had a he typed up.
Oh, let me look at the chat. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Why can't I find the chat?
Oh, nice. Why do people get on here and just be upset about comics generally?
Okay. Speaking so positively about the comic business is very encouraging. Thanks, Paul.
I'll say this too, which is like here's the thing I'll say, which is anyone who I met along the way, I've been doing this 15 years professionally. Anyone who I met along the way who didn't quit and just kept refusing to do anything but comics currently works in comics in some capacity.
I have one more question, if you don't mind.
Please.
Sure, go ahead.
So when I don't know if you were around Oni in this time. So when artists or writers like Brian O'Malley, the guy who did Scott Pilgrim, pitched the idea, what sort of things do company? I'm not sure if this is like specific to Oni Press or any other company, what sort of ideas or things that gets you interested in these pitches that tells you, yeah, I want this book in my company because this idea is really good?
I mean, I was 16 when Brian Lee O'Malley was pitching. I would guess I was probably 18. I was 18 when he was pitching it, so I was not there. I've been fortunate enough to be working with Brian on 20th anniversary of Scott Pilgrim Plans, which we're doing for San Diego this year. But it comes down, like, you come to find, I guess here's the good way to put it, which is a lot of the pitches that we get are all kind of in the same, like, genre collision territory. By which I mean, like, I've got a book about the Civil War, but what if Ulysses S. Grant was a vampire and Robert E. Lee was a werewolf and it's called Civil War Werewolf? You know what I mean? And, like, that's fine. That's not anyone's specific book, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I get a lot of stuff in that vein. And it's easy to rely on, like, the tropiness of what comics can be, but its central thing is, I'd say, is whether you're making a comic or a short story or film, screenplay, whatever the case may be, yeah, there's, like, the surface level thing of, like, this is the cool stuff that's happening in my book. But also, on the other hand, what is your story about? And I don't mean, is it about werewolves in the Civil War? I mean, like, what is the human theme running through that story that will allow people to connect on an emotional level? What is it actually about? Like, me and when I was working at Boom, we had a long conversation about why Something is Killing the Children by James Tynion is so popular. And on the surface level, that book is about a monster hunter named Erica Slaughter, who wears a cool teeth mask, you know what I mean, and carries machetes and stabs invisible monsters. And all of that stuff is cool. But what the book is also actually about is about Erica as, like, an abused child processing trauma, and that trauma is represented in the book metaphorically as monsters. You know what I mean? And so it's like a subtext to James's storytelling, which is why he's won infinite Eisner Awards at this point. But, like, that's quality, thematically resonant. Come for the monsters, stay for the trauma. You know what I'm saying? These are the things that make my favorite superhero comics or otherwise. This is the kind of stuff that makes you think about things 3 years after you've read them and still have a pang in your heart. You know what I mean? And so that's one level of it. And then the other level is there space here specifically for comics? Is there space here for this to be an interesting comic? Is there something about this story specifically that can only be done in comics? Because, like, a thing that we have gotten a lot of over the past 10 years, as you may probably can suspect, is people being like, yeah, here's my failed TV pilot. Like, can this be a comic? And it's like, these people are just talking in a diner for 12 pages. There's nothing visually appealing to be told on a page where an artist can cut loose and do something here. So comics that are comics and can function first and foremost as comics, but also that have story that, like, resonates and isn't just cool stuff. Does this make sense? I'm kind of talking out of
Yes. So basically the messaging is what I got from the first where you were talking about, and something that can be told specifically through comics.
Yes.
Okay, I understand.
Anybody else have another question?
Yeah, we got one.
Go ahead.
Nice to see you, Hunter. So just talking about pitching and kind of piggybacking off that theme, if you line up, like, the top 10, publishers in comics today, I would say 7, 8 of them are saying no submissions, closed for pitches. Like, it just seems like a brick wall that's impossible to get around. And yet, clearly ideas are getting in, and new ideas and new voices are making their way into the industry. So I just want to ask what your advice is for people like us who are sitting here behind the brick wall going, how do I do this? Right? Like, how could I possibly reach a guy like Hunter and his staff at Oni when
like,
they're not?
The only way to do it is to self-publish something yourself. have some kind of sample. Like, I think it would be, unless you had a previous writing credential from being a fiction writer or being, working in TV or film in some capacity or video games or what have you, need some sort of calling card that you have collaborated on. This is actually why, if you look at guys like Matt Fraction and Ed Brubaker, et cetera, they all start, and Rick Remender, all started as cartoonists drawing their own stuff. You know what I mean? If you can find an artist to collaborate with to put together a calling card, that is the sample that you can use to meet people at a convention or put on Kickstarter. I've published multiple books that I discovered on Kickstarter. I have a book called Dwellings, the first book I published at Oni. That's like was one of our biggest selling books of last year that the creator had just been doing on Kickstarter. So there's definite ways to do it. You have to be a little bit relentless, and you have that first thing you do, unless you have another writing credential, you're going to have to do for yourself. No one will greenlight, and I think it just is worth telling you, no one will greenlight just a pitch doc for a previously unpublished writer without there being some sort of accompanying art component to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in my case, I have a fully finished book that's ready to go. I just need eyeballs on it,
Cool.
Hunter, specifically for Oni, is there any advantage to being agented?
I mean, yeah, it comes down to it comes down to your personal tolerance level, right? So like the agent is there to lend their expertise to areas that you may be unfamiliar with. So like, I'm unsure about what this contract says. My agent is going to translate it for me and make sure that there's nothing pernicious in there, right? The agent will make sure that I get paid on time. The agent will make sure that we follow up at a certain point. If you need anything, you can have the agent call. You know what I mean? Not that that always happens, but I work with dozens of literary agents in various capacities, as well as film and TV agents. A lot of talent doesn't have them because they don't want to either they don't feel comfortable doing that and working with an agent capacity. They don't want to take the financial percentage off of their income that comes from doing that. So there's nothing wrong with having an agent. I don't think it's like a silver bullet to getting anything done, but it certainly has its advantages, and probably has more advantages like early on in your career. Unless you become wildly successful, in which case you definitely need an agent. I mean,
Okay, anybody else? Because I have more questions I can ask. Okay. Now you've been primarily on the business end of things. Any desire to be on the creative side of things? I mean, I know that as a publisher, you're probably doing a lot of creative work, but
yeah, there's a huge creative component to my job as well, which is like, I'm fortunate. Like, I originally wanted to be a comic book artist. I think I probably forgot to mention that, but I originally wanted to be a comic book artist. I was always very good at art. At least I was before I stopped. But I've always been, like, we'll often do stuff like, hey, the logo should look like this, and we'll do like a rough, approximation of it. Here's what we're thinking for laying out this cover or something, like, all the time. And trust me,
that skill. But is there a book in you?
we're currently doing the revival of EC Comics here at Oni, and so I have been up to my eyeballs in thinking up not dumb, but zany idea starters for potential EC comic stories and cover concepts and stuff like that. So would I wish I could do more of that all day long and not stare at contracts or redline documents or whatever? Yes, but I think I have a pretty healthy outlet currently for all things creative, fortunately.
Got it. Now, usually I ask advice on, on how to be an artist or writer or an editor. So let me ask you this. what if somebody wants to go out there and start their own publishing company and put out other people's books? Do you have any advice for somebody who wants to do that?
It can be done, and like I do think that there's like a healthy amount of that. It's good, like that kind of entrepreneurship is good for any industry. So frankly, I wish people would do more of it. It requires a lot of couple considerations. Is like it took a long time for me to learn the amount of different departmental skills, how you track books that are being shipped overseas, how you do a licensing contract, how you do a creator-owned comics contract, how you set up your relationship with the printer, how you deal with Diamond, like all that stuff is like very nuanced. So there's a lot of like institutional knowledge there. It can be difficult to learn how to do all of those things at once. You know what I mean? If you're doing it for the first time, that's a heavy lift. So it's best to have like a couple people who have done at least part of that, probably collaborate and work together. And then you just need to be in for the business of working with creators, which is not like, it's not a 9 to 5 job where people show up and punch in and punch out. Like there's a lot of back and forth there. There's a lot of places where that can go wrong. And so you just need to understand what you're getting into, figure out what amount of risk you're willing to tolerate, and also be willing to, have some accidents happen, be lucky, figure out how to get by if something goes wrong. It's not the world's most surefire business by any standpoint. We're making art, not commodities. So you can't just stamp out art on the production line. You know what I mean?
Well, I want to ask you something as a follow-up to an earlier statement you made. So Oni is West Coast based, but you're on the East Coast.
Yes.
Does that mean the majority of the staff are all remote, if not all of them? And was that something that happened after the pandemic?
Yeah, it started during the pandemic. So all of us are remote at this point. So we have people everywhere from LA to Portland. So I'd say about half the staff lives in Portland. We have a couple folks. I'm the only one who lives in rural Virginia because my wife is a college professor. We have folks in New York. We just hired a new guy in Montana. So like we're scattered to and fro.
Got it. So how many like full-time staffers at Oni?
Just about 25.
Well, that's pretty big. Wow. Okay. Okay, guys. Yeah, go ahead.
Publish about 70 books a year. So
yeah, that is I guess you would need a lot of staff for that.
Yep.
Any other questions, guys? Yes, Josh.
This is a bit more personal, but you said you grew up in DC.
Yeah.
I grew up in DC. I'm in DC right now. So
Okay.
like, what about where were you like?
I was born at the Foggy Bottom Women's Hospital, which I believe is down. And there's a new medical center there in Foggy Bottom. And then shortly after I was born, my parents moved to Montgomery County, so I lived in Silver Spring for the majority of my upbringing. Lived in Bethesda for a little bit, and then moved back into DC when I was in my early 20s after college.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, so if nobody has any questions, we'll close it off. But I do want to make a few announcements. We have some other amazing guests coming up. On June 2nd, we have Joan Hilty, who is who used to be at Nickelodeon, and now she's at Avatar Studios, an animation studio. And after that, we have Barbara Dillon, who's the editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press.
Nice.
Relatively new company, but she seems to be doing a lot of good work.
She's great.
So,
She writes about Oni books all the time.
oh, okay.
Thumbs up.
And I have some other guys who I'm still waiting to settle on dates on, and I will announce those as we have them. And maybe in a week or so, maybe 2 weeks also, I'll have this recording up on the website. So again, I'd like to thank Hunter for coming out. Everybody, please give him a nice round of applause.
Thank you so much for having me, everybody. Thank you for listening to me.
And Hunter, thank you so much for doing this. It was great to see you again. Hopefully, I'll see you around one of these Comic-Cons.
Yeah, New York Comic Con. We'll see you there.
I'll see you at Comic-Con too. I'll
Great.
try to make it, but
Thanks,
due
Tara.
to being on disabilities income, I have limited money.
Understood.
Thanks, Charles.
Bye.
Okay, guys. Good night. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.